All right, hello. This is first podcast in a while. Here to talk a little bit about finance and other things, and just quick update. My family's doing better. I'm so thankful Sarah had her surgery and seems to have improved quite a bit. So we're grateful for no more medical incidents lately. It's been a few weeks since I've gotten on here and talked about anything, but I'm looking forward to this one real quick. Well, you never know how quick. First of all, I just want to say I was reading email, and I have in the past I'd signed up for missionary emails, and I forgot the name of this missionary, but it's in Italy. And speaking of how Starbucks is moving in, starting with one store and then just multiplying. And of course, they want to see that with the gospel. And he's like, people can do that for overpriced coffee. And can't they do that for, the ministry of the Lord? But it reminded me to pray for missionaries. And so I just wanted to say that first. I think, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like we have forgotten missions. And you go to some of these mega churches and they may have a missions offering, but to really hear of specific missionaries and what they're doing and what they're going through and how they need prayer. Let's not lose that consciousness and that on purpose prayer for their needs. And that, they'll learn how to be selfless, as we all need to learn. Because sometimes I think missionaries try to take their home culture to a foreign field instead of adapting the way Paul talked about in the Word, becoming all things to all people, that it might by all means save some. So we want to pray that that outreach is legit and that the Lord's anointing it. I wasn't going to say this, but today I had a late lunch and at work and started thinking through my own background in music and just discoveries I made along the way to different styles and sounds. And it was like the Lord just came over my heart that I don't need to forget my purpose, that there is something when God gives us any kind of musical ability, use it for His glory. So whatever your talent is or your skill set or your knowledge base, help people with it, use it, tap into the door of what maybe the Lord has for you to do more than just sitting around and, of course, working a job, which is significant to work. And I'm grateful for work, but I was realizing that life is not just work. There's another significance, even another identity we can have when we accomplish other things too. So just inspirational thought. Let's talk about the economy. So as you may have heard, the national debt went over 22 trillion actual dollars. That doesn't count liabilities like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid that can come in the future, or any future wars, natural disasters, or any other bills that are unexpected, recessions. All that's not on the balance sheet yet. We're just talking about current debt. Also, it's interesting how the Federal Reserve came out in January and then again here in February saying that they're going to pretty much slow down, if not call off, the shrinking of their balance sheet. Something I realized that might be eye-opening to you is when the Federal Reserve, which is a separate private bank from the federal government, supposed to be independent, yet authorized by the government, when the federal bank prints money, as people call it, or creates new money, to lower interest rates and to otherwise avoid recession or come out of one or, develop new loans to stimulate the economy, all that kind of thing. What you have to understand is that money that was created after the 2008 recession, and we're talking about, 3.5 or maybe up to 4.5 trillion dollars is what ended up on the balance sheet. So a good 3 trillion of that at least was new money. That money was not given to the economy. It was loaned to the economy in the form of the Federal Reserve buying treasury bonds and buying mortgage-backed securities and other debt-type assets. Remember, a treasury bond is the way the government borrows money to pay its bills beyond what it takes in taxes. And the government runs a deficit every year. And so they're increasing the national debt, hence the 22 trillion now that's accumulated. And so when there weren't enough buyers to buy those treasury bonds and loan the government money, the Federal Reserve stepped in and bought a bunch of those to keep the interest rates low and to make debt easier across the country to stimulate the economy. And with that, the Federal Reserve used some of that new money to help out the banks. particularly when the banks had made all these home loans that people were defaulting on, and those loans had been sold to the stock market and were now worthless. They've been rated AAA credit and then now they're worth nothing to investors because people aren't going to pay their debts back with interest. So there's not going to be any profit there, any return on investment. So the investors don't want them, and so they're not going to buy any more mortgage-backed securities from the banks, which means the banks get no new money from the sale of those assets to make new loans, because they don't just make loans on deposits that when you put your money in the bank, they loan it out to somebody else and keep part of it on reserve. But that's not the only way they get their money to make loans. And so they're selling the loans they've already made to an investor and then using that money to make new loans. Well, if investors don't want it, all of a sudden the whole thing comes to a stop. So it brings your economy to a stop because banks are not making as many loans to buy more houses and cars and such. And it threatens the whole credit industry when people are defaulting anyway. And just a horrible domino effect starts happening. So the Federal Reserve jumped in there as if it was an investor and bought treasury bonds to help the government stay afloat and keep those interest rates low, which a lot of debts are based on those interest rates. The 10-year treasury bond usually affects your fixed rate loans, such as cars, fixed rate mortgages, federal student loans, and then your federal funds rate, when the Fed raises those interest rates, that usually affects the adjustable rates, like adjustable rate mortgages, private student loans, and credit cards. So that's generally what happens, that you could play with the different factors there. But anyway, that's why mortgage rates have actually gone down at the end of 2018, because as the stock market didn't seem to have much room to grow, as the economy wasn't maybe growing as fast as investors wanted, and interest rates had been raised by the Federal Reserve, then they decided, well, if the economy is going to slow down, we'll just buy treasury bonds. And so that lowered the interest rate on those bonds, which in turn lowered interest rates on mortgages. And there's a whole investment principle behind that. But the Federal Reserve, when people aren't making those kind of commitments in investment, the Federal Reserve became the ultimate investor to buy treasury bonds and those mortgage-backed securities to keep everything afloat, which kept house prices high as a result. Interest rates became lower than ever. I'm talking about after 2008. And so we're back really where we were pre-2008, the last recession, which has been 10 years, going on 11 since then, to now. So here we have high house prices again, higher than ever car prices, vehicles, student debt and just the whole cost of tuition's high, medical is high, and prices really aren't any lower now than they were in the store either since back then. So, they say, well, inflation hasn't taken off much, but actually a lot of the key assets like houses and cars and your education, so to speak, even though it's, I guess, not technically an asset, but you have a degree that can hopefully get you a job to buy assets. And, and the medical, these prices are up again. And, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So if they lose their job in the next recession, and remember, it's been about 10 years, so most of us don't even know what a recession is because we've never lived it, if we even know the concept. But think about this. So a person loses their job in a recession, they file for unemployment, say it's approved. It usually only goes 6 months, and it's about 60% of your income that you had. Well, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, where's the other 40% going to come from? Because if Americans aren't saving even an emergency fund, and I guess they're not if they're living paycheck to paycheck, what's left for savings, then we have set ourselves up for an epic household fail, a default of sorts, if we have another downturn in the economy. And if a domino effect starts again, like it happened in 2008, we're really in a mess. Now, the experts will tell you, well, lending is tighter, there's stricter standards, they're not just giving out loans willy-nilly for mortgages and all that like they were back in 2008. And that's true. They have to check your income now. Credit card statements have to have more about your billing and amortization. So there are some changes that have been made, but at the end of the day, and they have to put on there, how much you'll pay, how long it'll take, all these factors, like I say, with the amortization that will help you understand what you're dealing with when you're, dealing with debt. The problem is if you lose your income, and if unemployment's not enough to supplement, and then it runs out in 6 months on top of that, and you can't guarantee a recession will be over in 6 months. You can try to reapply for unemployment, but There's no guarantee. Sometimes the government extends it for 9 months in a recession, but you just don't know. There's no guarantees there. And if you don't have savings to fall back on, who's going to pay the bills? And so I believe we have set ourselves up for something bigger than 2008. Not because the debts are worse in how they were given fundamentally or even how they're rated and traded on the markets. It's the fact that no debt is a good debt if you can't afford it. If you lose the income to pay it back, all of a sudden you're asking for a default, regardless. And remember, like I said, the Federal Reserve pumped trillions of dollars, new dollars, into the economy after 2008. Quantitative easing, multiple times. They pumped money in. Well, that was loan money. That money has to be paid back with interest. So the only way, really, the Federal Reserve was able to put that new money out there is on the understanding that, for example, those Treasury bonds are going to be paid back by the Treasury. The government will have to make good on its debt with interest. So actually, the Federal Reserve will make money on its money. The problem is, where's the extra money going to come from just to pay the interest? So actually, when you increase the money supply, in the long run, you might be sucking it out because that's a debt that has to be paid back with interest. But you spread it out over the long term and you don't feel it as bad. But actually, the markets did start to feel it. As the Federal Reserve started rolling off the treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, they were trying to roll off about $50 billion worth of treasuries a month this past year. And they finally are just having to say, we're going to slow that down. I mean, that's just in the last few weeks have been announced because the markets are not reacting well, because you can't give somebody a bunch of free money and then try to take it back and not have consequences, not have reactions. And what we've done is we've pumped up investors, pumped up the stock market, made everybody happy after 2008, and then we want the money back. And it's just not how it works. Surprise, surprise, that wasn't Federal Reserve free money that was just going to slosh around the markets and never have to come back. And when you think about that, because at some point, they're going to have to do probably what other central banks have already been doing. The European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, have not stopped their quantitative easing, according to the experts. It was our central bank that stopped the easing and started the tightening. The others hadn't even started tightening yet. How long can we just create new money out of thin air? And by the way, that's the only reason I think our currency didn't really have an implosion in the exchange markets of the world, is because everybody was printing money, so to speak, making new money. And so it kind of, I think, canceled out. I could be wrong, but in Asia, it's probably been manipulating their currency there in China and such for a long time anyway. They figured that out a long time ago. And so it's just hard to really know the future, because I'm not sure we know the present. I'm not sure we know what the Federal Reserve really has been doing with all of its money all these years. So remember, it's a private bank with 12 banks under it, divided up by region in the U.S. that can be publicly traded, it's my understanding. So they can actually be for profit and on the stock market. So feeding into the actual central Federal Reserve. So anyway, I don't understand it all, to be honest about that. But what I'm understanding is really there's no such thing as free money. Because when you create new money, not only was it a loan that had to be paid back by the big people, but us little folks using that money are watching prices stay high or even go higher, right? Remember, the Federal Reserve's target is 2% inflation a year of prices. But when you think about education and cars and houses and medical, then, and we realize these prices are just continually going up, and yet our wages aren't keeping up, that's a problem. Take the housing market, for example. I was just reading experts talking about that today. So, but again, the experts, and of all the probably hundreds of articles now I've read, and I look at it daily practically, nobody's talking about how, hey, this is why quantitative tightening affects our economy. It was loans that had to be paid back because the Federal Reserve was only investing in loans. They weren't just handing out free dollars to everyone. That's why people didn't get a bailout to save their homes from foreclosure. Remember, when the government did its bailouts and the Federal Reserve did its money printing or creating of new money, that money was not handed to people. It was basically handed to banks, and taken off the back of investors so that they could do their thing. And that was supposedly keeping the infrastructure of the economy strong, which then kept a ripple effect from, defaulting banks around the world. But in reality, what do we do to the currency? And we never let the prices reset to make things more affordable for the average person. And so here we are, still struggling with high prices, and yet in more debt than ever before, with higher prices than ever before, and waiting on another recession. And, the housing market in particular, it's one of my biggest fascinations. It's by far the largest household debt in the country. I think it's around $9 trillion tied up in mortgages, whereas credit cards, around $1 trillion, student loans, 1.4 to 1.5 trillion in the country. And cars, I forgot how many billions to over $1 trillion there. And so I have a chart of it at work that I made for my students. But anyway, it's just something to think about. And as all this debt accumulates. So obviously the practical advice would be get out of debt if you can, please. So let me give you a tip that came up with I have a couple of students that work for me, and one of them got their tax refund, and she said, hey, what should I do with the tax refund? Should I pay off my credit cards, or should I go on a trip to Hawaii? That's my dream trip with my husband, she said. And I need the break. I need the mental break really bad. And she says, I know what you're going to say, but I'm asking, I want to have that talk anyway. And I was like, well, this is great. Let's talk about this. She came back the next day and said, hey, I went ahead and used the money to pay off the credit cards. My husband wasn't ready to go to Hawaii because of his work schedule anyway. She said, I did the right thing, I think is the way she put it. And I said, well, that's great. And then she walked away and I said, hey, wait a minute. Guess what? It just popped in my mind. And I was like, you know what you just did? When you paid off those 3 or however many credit cards with that tax refund, and you no longer owe those debts that you would have had to pay into the long term, what you did is you saved on the interest that you would have paid each month on each of those debts. You were going to make the payments anyway, right, out of your paycheck, whatever. So how about, what if you took the interest savings that you're no longer having to pay and put that in a Hawaii account, a savings account? I said, you just paid for your Hawaii trip, and you're out of debt, fundamentally, but you paid for your trip that you wanted and any other savings thereafter, since people may pay on a credit card for 20 years if they only make the minimum payment. You might actually have future savings even after a Hawaii trip. You just freed yourself up if you don't add to the debt, right? If you don't create new debts. So that's, I like a basic common sense thing, but it's like a light bulb moment when you realize paying off debt is savings, because all debt comes with an interest fee that's added on beyond what you borrowed, or nobody would loan you money, right? They want a kickback. They want a return on that. So debt to you is a liability. Debt to the lender is an investment. So interest that's working against you on your debt is working in their favor as an investment. They're making money by you paying interest, right? But my responsibility is to make sure that is a good debt, meaning, is it necessary? Is it affordable? And does it have a return for me that's higher than the interest rate I'm paying to them, or of equal and better value, not just equal, but better value? Some debts don't give me a return of money, but they give me a return of value. For example, I'm paying a mortgage on this house, and I have to pay 4.25% interest rate on my mortgage. But it gives us a wonderful place to make memories and have a family, is how I provided for my family. I may never sell this house for more than I paid. Now, I believe, actually the market says right now I could sell it for almost double what I paid, because I got a foreclosure, amazing blessing of a foreclosure deal. But not everyone can find a house that way. It took me years and lots of research and hard work and savings, but it worked out. My point is, yes, I'm losing money on interest unless I sell the house off. By the way, I just did the math about a weekend ago and figured out how much I will have invested in this house total, right? Now I'll have to add a little more interest into that because I'm still making the payments. Hopefully we'll pay off this year or next year after we settle all our medical bills and all that. I got a bunch more to pay tomorrow. But the point is, at the end of the day, if I've invested a total of X amount of dollars, that includes taxes, insurance, interest, and of course the principal that I owe on the place from the actual loan, and I add all that up, and then say, well, if I sold it for this, by the way, I'm also saving in rent because I have a lower mortgage payment than most people's rent payments, then how do I come out ahead, and how does that play out in the math? Now, that's assuming you can sell your house for a certain price. What if you can't? it was still a good investment because it provided for my family. So some debts are just worthy if they're affordable, if they're needed. And we realized we did need a place to go eventually. Not everyone needs to jump into housing right now, especially when this is a seller's market. It's a hot market. There's a shortage of affordable homes, no doubt about it. And I believe I read today about a 7% increase in prices on affordable homes as it's been going. I mean, it's just spiking and spiking. And so a lot of contractors, the materials are just too expensive. So when they build a house, you're looking at $300 minimum $1,000. That's the cost of the materials. So now we're here in the South. It might not be quite as much, but there's just a huge shortage of contractors building the homes that the average American can afford. Because if you're only on with a bachelor's degree making the median income or average income of 45 to 50 grand a year, then you don't want to have a home that's going to be over 200,000, and yet contractors aren't making those. I mean, your payments are going to be $1,000 a month or more, and at the front end of that, the first years of that, you're paying like $700 in interest alone. You're almost making a rent payment just paying your mortgage interest, right? Because the interest rate fixed is over how much you owe, for that year divided by the months in the year if it's calculated monthly. So anyway, the more you put on the front end, the more you save long term, and the faster you pay it off, the fewer payments with interest you have to make. So anyway, just some thoughts there. If you find a good deal, I believe every now and then there are good deals in any type of market, including the seller's market. You can still find some buying deals, but they're just few and far between. And sometimes you have to know somebody, or, hey, we're about to put this house on the market, we'll give you first dibs, or something like that, because, or maybe even trying to talk someone out of their home. Say, hey, I got cash. If you're willing to walk, or I've got financing. If you've been wanting to sell, you have some economic reason you want to get out of your house, you're downsizing, you're retiring, let me take that off your hands before you put it on the market, please, and talking to people in your network, work in school and church, wherever, and seeing if because you ought to explore those options before you just give up or before you settle on something that's priced too high. Because remember, if the price is high now, there's no guarantees it will continue to be able to go up. Just because it's a high pressure market now, at some point, especially if a recession rolls around, there's no way there's going to be that many buyers in the market. Well, I should say no way, there's always a way, but you don't know that. The chances are less, put it that way. So be smart, be careful. And I have a passion for housing. I love to talk about it. And this is our second home, and sold the first one, made 10 grand on that. And that was really at the beginning of the seller's market. Now we're just seeing so much pressure. I believe we could sell this place right now for about double, but we wouldn't. Where would we go, right? Because then we're going to pay a high price since it's not a buyer's market. So anyway, here we are. But it's fun and also important to study and ride out the markets, and that's same with the stock market. I got really fortunate on my Roth IRA. It was invested in a mutual fund, of course, and it had a great bank year in 2017. Well, then I decided that the annual fee was ripping out any growth. So I switched to a TD Ameritrade, a different company that the bank suggested I go to because they had no fee. So in the process of switching, I did not pick another mutual fund, and I asked him, I said, where's this money being invested? He said, well, it's just sitting in a money market account right now until you pick an investment or a mutual fund, in other words. And I haven't picked one yet. And ironically, there went 2018 when the markets actually apparently lost value. So now that would be a nice time to buy if markets are going down, but just to hold wasn't necessarily the thing to do. And so I got fortunate. I didn't lose a penny, looks like. And then I can just put it right back in the market. I actually saw an investment article today about, hey, are you ready? You're going to go ahead and when are you going to use your cash and put it back in the markets? I don't put a lot in the markets. I think there's a lot of pressure on markets to have to deal with the loss of investors because a lot of those are retirement accounts, and we have a huge baby boomer generation of millions of Americans about to retire. They're going to be pulling money out. Nobody's talking about that. The experts are not addressing because they want you to have confidence. The markets are always going to go up. And they might, because are we going to have a bunch of new money created, right? So, who knows? You see, when the Federal Reserve buys Treasury bonds and keeps interest rates low, and investors don't have a reason to go to bonds. It makes stocks more attractive even if they're not gaining as much, because as long as they're gaining more than bonds, investors head to stocks if they feel like, it's not too shaky. And so it's one way to kind of flush investors back to the markets. And by the way, if government debt wasn't so high, there wouldn't be so many treasury bonds to buy. And there wouldn't be that competition almost, as it were, with the stock market on which return is higher and where should investors go. Yes, that's a safety net for investors to invest in treasury bonds because the government says it'll never default. Not sure they're going to how to do that mathematically in the future without more new money printing or them raising taxes or cutting benefits or all three. But investors, if we had less government debt, investors would kind of have to stick with the markets if they wanted to grow or have that chance to grow, and actually would help markets in a sense because they wouldn't be pulling their money out all the time going to bonds. But we've allowed the debt to catch up with us, and I'm concerned that the American whole apparatus is questioning its own fundamental stability without having a bunch of new money. So anyway, something to think about. I know I talked way too much, but be smart. And a theme I've been wanting to introduce, and I don't know if I should, is basically how to recession-proof yourself. I'm no expert, but I know I can't just fall back on unemployment. I need my emergency fund. By the way, what should be in your emergency fund? A down payment on anything you're going to borrow. That's probably the last place you should start, though. Fundamentally, it ought to be your bills, basically utilities. Hopefully not defaulting on any debts as well. And your insurance deductible ought to be in place. Any deductibles, not only with medical, but with car or house or any kind of insurance you have, find out if there's a deductible attached and how much that might be. And they won't always tell you because they want to run the price, the value of your car before they tell you. But just go ahead and have some cash set back. And of course, experts say 6 to 9 months of bills. Nobody's doing that because everybody's living paycheck to paycheck, according to the stats. But that is smart. And at least keep the lights on, right? And when you have a job and you have cash, that's the time to get out of debt. This is the time of jobs. There's no promise that will that will continue. So this is the time to pay down debts while the money is flowing, and don't just spend it. All right? Cash will be king in a recession because that's when prices will be in question. They might even drop. For sure in something like, I would think, in housing, unless there's just so much pressure on housing and such a shortage of homes that is a way. By the way, in any recession, there is a chance that prices can still go up. You can still see a stagflation because if there's a shortage. So keep that in mind. And no matter how bad the economy is, and you would think prices would have to go down because nobody can afford anything. Not always true if there's a scarcity of the product. And that's what happened in Venezuela. That and the fact their currency was worth literally nothing. I've heard it said by experts that their currency went to, their inflation rate in their currency went to tens of thousands of dollars. That's like saying instead of this is $1, it's more than $10,000. And so the prices go up with that, and now it doesn't buy anything. And by the way, it doesn't matter how much money you have if there's a shortage. If there's no food and medicine, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Because you go to the store, the shelf is still empty. Walking in with more money doesn't guarantee and doesn't automatically produce more stuff to buy at the store. So keep your eye on big companies, because remember, a lot of small companies were put out of business by probably the unfair practices of big companies. And I'm not trying to be a Democrat here, but I am saying, because I have an independent mindset, but I'm telling you, I think a lot of the system has been rigged against small companies. And what I'd like to see, if the Democrats are going to complain against big business, then why don't they embrace small business like the Republicans did back under Reagan? Why don't they do a sweep? Why are they not actually saying, hey, let's level the playing field and help foster business and grow wealth? Instead, they keep producing new social programs and want to spread the wealth by taxing, they say the rich, but guess what? The rich know how to hide their money. So it's going to be a tax on the middle class. Every new social program they say, I get shaky because I'm like, I'm going to be the one paying for that because I actually have a job, I'm willing to work, and I have to pay taxes as a result. And I'm not a rich, smart person who know how to hide my money in some overseas account. I actually pay my taxes. So guess what? I'm going to be the one. And this here new medical bill, Medicare for All, that Congress just came up with, I believe 200 Democrats just signed on. Well, and under your Democrat candidates are pushing it hard as in prep for 2020. Medicare for all, another Obamacare on steroids. Well, guess what? They tell you they want to tax the rich, but the truth is this bill wants to raise everybody's Social Security tax from 6 to over 7%, and the people that make over 400,000 they'll pay more as well. But that's not the point. The point is that the rest of us, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't handle more taxes on your paycheck. It's just not in a sense fair that you're just taking from the people that are being productive and giving it to someone who's not. And let me just say, and by the way, it's not everyone at fault that's not productive. There's disability, there's aging, there are factors that cannot be controlled, and we want to help those people. And I believe that ought to be a community response, not the government's job to create all the safety nets. Because what they really do is just create massive social programs that de-incentivizes productivity and creates more debt when they can't pay for it. So it has multiple bad effects. Not to mention hurting the average person that does pay their taxes, but now they're watching their taxes go up as a result of these new spending plans. And that includes the Green New Deal or anything else. By the way, that was another interesting thing, the Fed coming out and slamming the Green New Deal and saying, no, that's government debt. It said we can borrow from the Federal Reserve, was put in there as one way to pay for it. And he was like, no, that's government debt's what that is, the Federal Reserve chairman said, Jerome Powell. So call it what it is, debt. More debt, piling it on when we can't afford what we got now. But I want to mention productivity really quick. What is productivity? Well, and fundamentally, what is the creation of wealth? If we talk about spreading the wealth, okay, we tax from some to give a special social program to others. But how do you create wealth? How is money even made? Is it really grown on trees? How is it created? Is it just printed on a press and magically poof, it's there? Is it based on a precious metal like gold or silver? Of course not. That was canceled in about the 1930s. And then the ability to cash any kind of money in for gold was even by foreigners we're talking about. Americans couldn't do it anyway. With the process of the New Deal and all the things that the federal spending that we forgot about after World War II and the Great Depression. And so the gold standard's been gone for 1,000,000 years, since the 30s or so. But then even foreigners couldn't cash in for gold in the 70s. I think Nixon took us off the rest of the gold standard there. So there's literally nothing backing our dollar bill. By the way, the dollar bill is not value. It's not money. It's the promise of money. It's a currency that represents what used to represent gold. It's a promissory note. It's like the government gave you a little bond that says, we owe you this much gold, $1 worth. And that was kind of whatever. And so the dollar is supposed to be backed by something, but it's not backed by anything. So guess what really determines the value of your dollar these days? Prices, right? As far as practically, when I go in the store, it's all about what can that dollar afford? What can it buy? And what are the exchange rates with other nations? That affects the value of the dollar too. But anyway, what is the creation of wealth? We have forgotten it in this country. I believe it's 3 things. It's your raw materials that you mine, because how can you create anything to sell, to make money, without having the materials to make it? So it's raw materials. It's labor. Somebody has to get the raw materials and do something with it. And it's creativity. It's ingenuity. It's technology. It's all the things that use the brain, because you have to have the skill of what to do with the raw materials to make them useful. And typically you have a skill that someone else doesn't have, but they have a skill that you don't have, and that becomes a trade. And we use currency to facilitate those trades, since I may not have what you need and vice versa. So the money allows me to buy from anybody and sell to anybody and vice versa. And the money makes the whole thing flow and makes trade a lot easier, because fundamentally we're all trading. Money really, in a sense, doesn't exist. Sorry. It's just a way to get an item you actually want while you have a job where you make items for somebody else. Products or services, of course. It's not just products. But fundamentally, and I'm sure there are plenty of experts that are going to bash me and say, oh, you don't understand, there's a lot more to it. And of course there is. But fundamentally, if we're creating wealth, we are working with some stuff to make better stuff, to make people's lives better. So your job has a purpose. You ought to feel that purpose and be inspired every day by what you do to serve the world around you. Because you're a blessing when you work. When you're willing to have a job and be productive in society, you're doing something. Because until robots do everything for us, the food's not just going to grow itself. and your car is not going to drive itself into your driveway after it made itself in the factory. It just doesn't work that way. And I believe robots will never take over the world because the Bible says we're always going to have money by which we buy and sell, at least as far as the mark of the beast is concerned. You can't buy food, according to the prophecy, without the mark of the beast. And so you're going to have currency, which means we're going to continue to have a huge economic system in the world till the end of times. So if robots were making everything, couldn't everything kind of be free at some point? Once robots reproduce themselves and fix themselves and program themselves, and you have all the artificial intelligence and machinery and automated controls to go with the robotic technology, and you put all that technology together, and couldn't it eventually provide all our food in farms that are inside buildings, which is already being tested, and make all your cars for you, do everything, and a drone delivers it right to your doorstep? Maybe they could deliver a new BMW to me. I don't know. But couldn't we, Amazon's looked into drones technology for a while now of how to deliver packages to your door. So basically, couldn't we automate almost everything? Almost everything. And make life free. Right? But guess what? It's never going to happen according to Scripture. And it's a nice concept, I guess. But, I'm glad I have a job. I'm glad something gets me up in the morning, makes me productive. I'm glad I'm doing something to help others and to share the love of Christ with the world. I'm glad that I get to be busy and do something with my hands or with my brain or with my mouth and try to be a blessing, right? And be productive because, again, the food doesn't grow itself fundamentally. And so life requires exercise. You're going to shrivel up and die without it anyway. I've decided at work to start running up and down the steps at work. And that means there's a staircase in the back that nobody hardly uses. And these nice big concrete steps, and I can just zip up and down and up and down. And 1 minute wears me out. And if I do it with little dumbbells, it's even more intense, little 10-pounders. So anyway, as I realized, I have a sit-down job. It uses tons of brain cells, I guess, but it certainly doesn't work my heart and lungs and muscles and all that. And I don't want to shrivel up just yet, right? Of course, I'm not really shriveling up, but I'm just saying I don't want to have too high of a fat percentage. So let's get serious about doing something for ourselves and for others, and be wise with our finances. Hopefully, become at least moderately recession-proof, smart with debt. Watch the markets closely. Watch where the new money is going. And by the way, as the Federal Reserve, it may not be making new money, but it's continuing to reinvest the money it already created. It's just going to keep buying more treasury bonds as it rolls up, it sells the ones it had. And that way investors don't have to pick up the difference and watch a spike in interest rates and all the mess that would go with a slowdown in the economy. So I'm here to tell you, the stimulation, almost to the point of stimulation, continues. 2008 is not over yet because they're having to reuse the money instead of tightening like they said they were going to do and thought they were going to do. I'm here to tell you we're not out of 2008 because we're still dependent on all that new money. And asset prices are higher than ever before, and that includes the stock market. Well, it's about to hit a new record. It's not quite there yet, but it's about to be. And then, like I say, cars and houses and education and medical, it's all just too high. And because it's based on debt, and we have to assume it can be paid back. Oh, I got to say something else. How do we pay back debt? With jobs, right? So we think if everybody has jobs, then we can afford all these debts in the country, and there won't be any defaults, and the government can just continue to tax those incomes to pay its debts, and everybody's happy. The problem is the government's not balancing its budget. The average American might be balancing their budget, but that means they're living paycheck to paycheck, barely balancing, nothing left over. So everybody is way too tight. But here's the thing. I say debt has to be paid back with jobs. And right now, unemployment seems the lowest it's been in 50, 60 years, potentially. Here's the problem with the unemployment numbers. And I'm going to tell you something the experts didn't tell you. The experts said, we don't know why wages haven't gone up over the last 10 years very much. Just now, is it even starting to do anything? They also said they didn't know why inflation wasn't going up. Well, after all the money printing. Well, it kind of did in houses and cars and those assets, like I said, stock market and such. But in the way they measure it, it didn't. Well, yeah, with what new money are people going to be able to use unless they take out more loans? How are they going to be able to spend more? Right? If unemployment's still a problem, well, that would explain, and wages aren't going up, well, that would explain why prices can't really go up if it's based on people's spending habits, when you got about almost 3/4 of the economy dependent on consumption. But here's the thing. What they didn't tell you when they say that they don't understand why wages haven't gone up in the last 10 years very much. Here's the thing. The unemployment numbers were manipulated. And it went to the point where if you just worked part-time, that counted as employed. And that all of a sudden made your employment numbers look better. Hey, more people have jobs. Yeah, because a lot of them are part-time jobs that don't count for much. They don't really pay the bills. And don't come with benefit either. And so your unemployment numbers not only now factor part-timers, but then it doesn't include the people that are no longer looking for work. And you could be facing 80 to 90 million Americans that have just given up, that are not in the workforce. So if you were to count them, what would your unemployment numbers really be? And you say, well, you're just talking about what other people have said online. I've heard these things online, but then something hit me in the last week or two. Nobody really explained this to me, and it hit me. Okay, wait a minute. We saw wages start to go up in the last year or two. What some would say was the Trump economy, and lowering tax rates for corporations so they could save more of their profits, which means they could hire more people and use those profits as an investment to grow their business by hiring more people. And since more people got a pay cut in the average household as well, not a pay cut, a tax cut, their paycheck went up, they're able to spend more, so what he did is hit it on both ends. He gave people more money to spend in their paycheck, though they're not getting as much tax refund now, including myself. Huge difference. But then on the other side of it, he also gave businesses not only, the knowledge that, hey, people are going to have more money to spend and lower taxes, but now they get to have lower taxes too in their corporate profits, which means there's a reason to reinvest and get those people spending their extra tax refund, their extra tax savings in their paycheck on these businesses' stuff. And so these businesses started hiring people to tap into that new spending that's about to happen and expand their business. And so now unemployment looks better. More people have jobs in this expansion of companies trying to tap in on their profits and not just buy back their stocks, but hire more people. The problem is they can fire as easy as they can hire. If a company does not see profits in the forecast, why would they continue to hire more people? That is no longer a viable investment. At which point, if they see profits waning, whether that's due to a tax increase, remember the Democrats are going to come in and raise those taxes eventually. The household taxes expire anyway here in just a couple of years or so. The corporate tax rate was never supposed to expire, but Congress can change that any day they want. And so if companies start laying off, we're asking for a mega recession. But also, what we have to think about is when you have so many people unemployed, even now, why would a company raise its wages unless it had to compete for workers? That's why the experts couldn't understand and explain why wages didn't go up, in my opinion. It's because the unemployment numbers were screwed, and on purpose. They were skewed, They were skewed on purpose to include part-timers and not include people that weren't looking for work. And so then, as those people not looking for work and by the way, this was something interesting, as unemployment continued to lower and more employed people, the experts saying, wow, we can't believe all these people coming out of the woodwork getting jobs and pushing up employment. It was like, come on, you knew they weren't looking for work. And that explained why wages weren't going up, because companies weren't looking for workers either, because they were right there begging for a job. So why would they have to raise wages to compete? So we've been fed some bull. This is the truth of the matter. But blame it on ignorance, as the experts would claim ignorance. And they did multiple times. I read it multiple times at national levels. We don't know why wages aren't going up. We don't know why employment isn't picking up or inflation or whatever. Anyway. Okay, well, there's a little bit of dissecting. Maybe I'm wrong about some stuff. Don't think so. I think the numbers speak for themselves. Hope this was a help to you. I would say if you can make yourself indispensable in your job by developing new skill sets, new certifications, new training, whatever it takes to grow that resume, to update your resume. I saw a stat recently, between a year or 2 years ago or so, where 78% of Americans had not updated their resume either. Not only were they living paycheck to paycheck and not saving, but they hadn't updated their resume. So update that resume. Be ready to be positioned for as many potential options as you can, because in a recession, you're going to need every option you possibly can get. Recession-proof yourself by increasing your resume, decreasing your debt, increasing your savings, because cash is king anytime prices go down in a recession, if they do. And then watch the markets closely and don't make any brash decisions right now, especially when the pressures are so hot and it's more of a seller's than a buyer's market, etc. So those are a few tips. One of my fundamentals is have all my assets paid off. Cars, houses, anything like that, so I don't feel like I'm risking my living, my livelihood, my provision for my family, just because I just had to go get risky on a debt or investment right away. No, I can be patient. I might miss a wonderful market opportunity to throw a bunch of cash into something, but right now I want to feel secure, and I'm recession-proofing my family. And that's my household. That's my goal. My wife helps guide me in that too, because she's smarter than me in a lot of ways. And so we put our heads together and what's best for the household. And it's been a blessing. And we feel better about these things than ever before. So there's no promises of tomorrow. There's no promises of a paycheck. Something could happen to our house or cars any day of the week. We know that. We thank God every day for the blessings that we have. We try not to take it for granted because we didn't do this. The Lord did it. And the Lord gives us the wisdom of stewardship. So I hope that's somehow encouraging to you as well. All right, keep up the good work. Let's be smart. We got some wild days ahead mathematically unless new money comes floating into the system. So be alert. Thanks.